Today on Waiting for the Encore, my guest is NAKIA Reynoso. NAKIA is a fierce soul singer who starred in the first season of The Voice and made it all the way to the semifinals. He's also been a band leader and force in Austin for over a decade. He's heavily involved in the civic realm and advocacy for musicians and has a well of experience and insight to draw from. So please enjoy my chat with NAKIA Reynoso. NAKIA joining me today. Thank you so much for joining me, my friend. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay today. How are you?
I'm doing okay, hanging in there. I've been starting these with just there's a lot I want to talk to you about today because you're a fascinating guy kind of right in the middle of the boiling pot here. So the way I've been starting these is just kind of getting a feel for where you were personally, kind of mid-March, what you had planned in the coming months with your normal schedule, your music career, and how it all kind of stopped for you and what you've been doing since then. And I know you've been doing a lot, and we'll get into it, but you can kind of just give us the preface of what you've been up to.
Sure. Well, in the beginning of March, I was in New York City. I was taking an acting class with award-winning actress Betty Buckley. It was a private class with just a few students in an acting studio in New York. And we were studying acting and scenes and meditation. And that was about a week long. And it was taking place, right as the rest of the world across the ocean were already dealing with coronavirus, and it had just begun to, come into the U.S. Through Seattle and other places. And I was in New York City when Mayor Adler made the decision to cancel South by Southwest, rightfully so. I think he probably saved a lot of lives, and I actually got sick with what my doctors believe was COVID while I was in New York. Two of my friends that work at a bar that I frequented twice while I was in New York both came down with COVID, as well as other patrons who were there that same weekend. It happened very quickly for me. It came on very quick and passed fairly quickly, but I was still sick when I flew home, so I came home and quarantined. Wow. Tried to get tested everywhere, but my symptoms had already subsided, and at the time they weren't testing anybody who was asymptomatic. And so all of my doctors had me, quarantining for a few weeks, and by the time I could get tested, there was no trace, obviously. In the middle of all that, like before the pandemic hit, my plan at the time was to focus most of this year on re-engaging with my acting career, doing training, and prepping myself to begin to do some auditions for Broadway shows in New York and in 2021. And I'd also been working on a musical episode of a web series that I score and do the sound design for and act in, called Skeleton Crew. And that had reignited my love of acting. I'd also started acting in another show called Demon Doctor that I also score and do the sound design for. And those things had really kind of, like I said, reignited that passion for acting, and I was really excited about it. I was really excited about scoring and composing music for film and TV, and so I was kind of prepping myself to do all these things and to kind of throw myself in the middle of it as I do. And pandemic hit. As you know, I'm the president of Austin, Texas Musicians, a 501c4 nonprofit focused on advocacy. Let me just shut that Facebook tab off so it'll stop going off. And a huge amount of my time, from the time that I got home and started quarantining, really even before I left New York, I was on conference calls with council members and the mayor and all of these things. And I came home and it was just boom, 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 meeting after meeting after meeting, dealing with resolutions from council, dealing with this, trying to make sure that you know, the Live Music Fund, which Austin, Texas musicians helped to bring to light and creation over the last, you know, year or so, was intact, and that musicians were getting some type of relief and recovery grants, and you know, making sure that, or trying to make sure that the barriers to get those were very low. And so part of my work in that was, as a former board member of the Texas chapter of the Recording Academy, and a previous recipient of Music Care services, I connected the city of Austin with Music Cares to be the organization that would disperse the money. And I did that because I knew how great Music Care's service was and how easy it is to access it. And unfortunately, in the process, the city threw a lot more, for lack of a better word, bureaucracy in the process that made it hard for musicians to not only apply, but in some cases, you know, kind of scared musicians off. Things like asking for bank accounts without making it clear that you didn't have to provide your bank account number. They just wanted to see how much was in the bank, which is completely unheard of when applying for relief grants. And you know, the big thing was, if you had received Music Cares grant already, which many of us had back in March and April, by the time this money came around in June or July, they were saying, well, if you'd already received a grant from Music Cares, which had nothing to do with the city of Austin, you couldn't get one of these grants. And I don't know about you, but $1,000 for my personal expenses doesn't last very long. So, you know, we fought back on that. It got a little ugly, but we were able to get them to change and lower the barriers midway through the process. They announced they were only able to give out about half of the $1.5 million. And so then they reopened it without those things that myself, Austin, Texas musicians, Ham, Sims, so many organizations wrote to them and said, please don't make these barriers or this grant so hard to get, you know. So they did that, and that was great. They're now in the process of taking applications for the Austin Creative Workers grant. There is a new resolution being passed around by Mayor Adler and other council members to create a dedicated music venue preservation relief fund out of federal money. Sure would be nice if the city could figure out where to get that outside of federal money so it can exist long term. Of course, during this whole process, I've also been a part of the Live Music Fund working group, which was put on hold while the Music Commission tried to take up systemic racism and making sure that the process was equitable for everybody across the board. And I've done some recording during the pandemic, some socially distanced recording with Matt Parmenter over at Ice Cream Factory Studios, where I've been working on the musical episode of Skeleton Crew, as well as I recorded a single there that I co-wrote with Savannah Welch's 8-year-old son, Charlie Cotton, called It's Never Too Late. And and I shot my portion of a music video there. I did a social distance music video there. But, you know, before the pandemic, like I said, the two things I was mostly focused on were acting and composing. I had also put together this brand new band and was planning. I had booked out all of our Austin dates. We weren't going to play outside of Austin unless there was good private gig money somewhere. But we were just going to play in Austin and focus getting our shit together, basically. And then we were going to record an album. And you know, got the songs. I was writing more songs. And we got together, we rehearsed, we played our first show for my annual birthday show at Saxon Pub in February. And that was my last gig before all this happened. So it was tough, you know, because the calendar would remind me, you know, oh, you've got a gig coming up at the Saxon Pub. Oh, no, I don't. Or worse, you know, you have a gig coming up at Threadgills and they're completely closed, you know, not going to reopen. So that's kind of where I've been, where I was heading, and here we are now. It's September.
So it's safe to say you've been busy. So there's a few things in there. I do want to delve back and get to know kind of your roots a little bit. But before we do that, I just want to address some of the things you said before I forget them later on. So you were simultaneously putting a band together, but you were also in New York. Does that mean you were this was a? I mean, if you're looking to get going on Broadway, I imagine that's a pretty big commitment. So were you flying back every couple of weeks or weekdays kind of thing, or was this just a?
Well, the plan would have been for me to fly backward and forward. Yeah, I would have. It's not super expensive if you book it out. Because it's a direct flight.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I usually sleep on the plane, so I just come backward and forward. But for the last 2 years, I've spent a fair amount of time in New York already. And, I have friends there that I can crash with and split time with. So the plan was, to be up in New York as much as I could and be in Austin as much as I could and try to do both.
Very cool. Very cool. So I'd like to learn a little bit about you. I did some research and wasn't able actually to find a lot about your early years. I know you were on The Voice, and I want to talk a little bit about that, but where are you from originally? And also, can you tell us a little bit about kind of your early years in music, how you got started singing, and also some of your big influences as you were growing up?
Yeah. Well, let's start from the beginning. So I grew up in Alabama, in a little town called Collinsville, Alabama, where I immediately, was enamored by, Kiss and Paul Stanley, and knew that I wanted to be some kind of singer, performer, and would, try to get people to stop in front of my house and roll down their windows and sing songs to them. My dad built me everybody's, kind of dream tree house or clubhouse in the backyard or whatever. It had a trap door and everything, but he also made sure to put a stage on top so I could climb on top and do my shows. And so I always, had been singing as long as I can remember, really, and always knew that I wanted to be involved in some kind of performance in some way. There was a few times that I veered off for a while. I thought I wanted to be an Egyptologist and go to Egypt and study archaeology, and there was a little bit that I really wanted to be a special effects artist. And visited some studios and met with some VX people and VFX people. But it always ended up coming back to music and acting and performing. And so, by the time that I was old enough to go to college, I ended up going to school on a theater scholarship in Alabama, and then actually was accepted into a prestigious school in New York for acting that I wasn't able to afford on my own or my parents, but even with the grant money and partial scholarship that I was offered. So I didn't get to go. And I stayed back in Alabama, and eventually I moved to Atlanta. I worked for some record labels, and I worked for producer Brendan O'Brien for a while. Moved home in the early 2000s or late 90s, and then in the early 2000s, I moved to Chicago to work for a record label after being a street rep for that label, working with a then unknown John Mayer and Train and Five for Fighting and these other folks. And so moved to Chicago in 2001. And then in the spring of 2002, I came here to Austin for my first South by Southwest with a friend. And I met my husband the first day I was here. And
wow, first day, huh?
Yeah. And so, that was the beginning of my journey as an Austinite. He took some time to show me around a little bit outside of South by Southwest, and I really fell in love with the city and of course fell in love with him. And I moved here in August of 2002, so 18 years ago. Wow. This past month. And in fact, Labor Day of 2002 is when I went back to Chicago to get all of my stuff that was in storage at my boss's office, and came back with all that. But that was kind of what happened. I got here. I immediately started playing solo, doing solo piano shows around town at open mics and any place that would have me. And then in 2004, I joined a band called the Small Stars. It was led by Miles Zuniga of Fastball, and some amazing musicians like Matt Hubbard and Landis Armstrong and Jeff Johnstone and John Bush. And that was a really, really wild, crazy kind of everything was themed. We all had characters. It was actually we put it on as a musical a couple of times, even with scripts and everything. So it was really, really nuts. Towards the end of that, I was again, always writing, right? And so I left that band, and Matt Hubbard and Matt McNabb basically co-produced my first EP. It was a big chunk of it was recorded out at Luck at Willie's Saloon, actually, with a computer that I had sold Willie via Matt Hubbard. And I put together a band. It had all these great, amazing Austin musicians in it, and that was called NAKIA and the Southern Cousins. And we were a band and did really well and played Austin City Limits Festival in 2008, and we're really picking up steam. And then in 2009, after my dad died, I was going through a bit of a depression, and I broke up the band when one of our band members was moving away. I just kind of took that as a sign to put things off and or stop or whatever. And then I joined Alejandro Escovedo's band as a backing vocalist, did a whole bunch of shows with him, recorded the record with him and Tony Visconti and Carla Menzur, who was also doing backing vocals with me, with Tony at the helm, of course. And when that gig was up, I decided to form the Blue Scrifters, which is it was really Tony Visconti's suggestion. I was like, man, I'm just so bummed out, really wanted to, keep doing what I was doing. But he was like, just why don't you just start a band, kind of, get into, the roots of the blues. And so I sat down with Mac McNabb, and we started going through all these old blues and soul singles and put together a bunch that were mostly not as known tunes, and a handful that were very well known. Obviously, you can't just play, rare tunes. And so we did that, started a residency, immediately got picked up for Blues on the Green, and all these other things were happening. And then in the winter of 2010, in December, I think, I got an email from a casting director asking me to be a part of The Voice. And never heard of The Voice. It was new. I was on season 1. And I thought it was a joke. And my friend convinced me to check it out. And so I did, and I went on the show, and as you know, I was chosen by CeeLo and Blake, but I chose CeeLo and went on to be one of their first top 8 performers, as well as a semifinalist on the show. And it is what it is. It was great. I had a great time. It was a lot of fun, but it ends. We were fortunate we got a tour. So, but I spent all of 2011 in Los Angeles in some form or fashion, whether it was in a hotel or, with friends while I was writing after the show was over. Then I came home, and instead of, kind of putting the same band back together, I just began to rearrange the band a little bit, and started integrating more of my original tunes into the existing, what was at the time the Blue Scrifters set. And then I went and made an EP of those songs in 2012 in Los Angeles with a bunch of different producers and writers. And that was called Drown in the Crimson Tide. And then I came home from that. We toured that record, the Dream Big tour, and that was in 2013. I was in talks with the president of Rounder Records to get signed to Rounder, and Rounder got acquired by Universal Music's, I think at the time they were calling it Concord Music, and so every project that they were working on was all put aside, and they kind of started from scratch, and so that happened, and 2014, around this time is when I joined the Texas chapter of the Recording Academy and got really involved there. And then they asked me to be a board member. I got really involved with advocacy. I started going to Washington, D.C., and to the state capitol to meet with congressmen and women to talk about things that were important to artists. I became a member of the Austin Music Commission, where I eventually became the chair of the Austin Music Commission. And again, then another one of my parents died, and I got super depressed at the same time that I had a really bad vocal polyp, and I had to have my that removed. And so I was on vocal rest for months. And the end of 2014, I believe I think I'm good with my dates here. The end of 2014 was my first year as a Black Fret grant recipient. So the 2015 year, I was I think what they call it, their 2015 season. I don't know. So I received a minor grant from Black Fret that year. And then the following year, I received a major grant from Black Fret. And, somewhere along the way, Randy Miller, who was working with Ollie TX, putting together the album and the concert every year, he called me up and asked me to do they were going to do a tribute to the blues. And it started out that way, but it ended up having like the Eagles on it and other, not our Eagles songs, not the actual Eagles, which were not blues at all, but it still sounded great. So I got the Blue Scrifters back together, and we did a cover of Whipping Post, which KATX really loved and started playing a bunch, and other places started playing a bunch. And that really convinced me to really finish the record that the Blue Scripters started. And so we started that up again in 2016, and we finished it in the beginning of 2018. Fast forward to the August of 2018, 2 years ago, this past month, we released Blue Scrifter as an album. And it was really well received, great reviews, great digital sales. It's crazy. It's a record of all covers of all these great blues artists and songs that I love. And it really has easily outsold anything that I put out of my originals prior to that. And when I say outsold, it literally is a difference. I've sold more physical copies of my own stuff. I've streamed more of my own stuff, but for whatever reason, this blues record, people on Amazon and iTunes physically buy the tracks or the album digitally, you know what I mean? Like instead of streaming it. So it's fine because I get more money that way, obviously, but and the original songwriters get paid because I'm licensing these songs to be on there, so that's good for everybody involved. But it was really surprising to me. And it still does really well. And I get a little bit of money from that every quarter, so that's great. I have boxes of this sitting here though, because we toured a lot in 2018 and the beginning of 2019, but my priorities began to shift in 2019 when I began to start creating what is now known as Austin, Texas Musicians nonprofit. So everything kind of took another pause, and I was focusing on that, and that's when I was beginning to focus on acting and scoring. Here we are, 2020 in the middle of the pandemic.
Well, that's a full recap for sure. Just going back to a couple of those items, I'm interested to know, because you do, the blues and the soul is definitely a strong part of your vocal presentation and your calling card. Who are your favorite singers, and who are the singers that you really wanted to sing
Sure.
like as you were coming up and as an adult as well?
Uh, as a kid, I definitely did a lot of emulation of singers like Simon Le Bon and Steve Perry. Um, Probably some Paul Stanley, but then I moved into more what I would say like my hair metal phase. So I was and kind of hard rock as well, and southern rock. It was a big thing where I grew up. So a lot of Skinner, a lot of Bad Company. Like I can remember the first audition that I went to for a band. I was still in high school, I think, and maybe I was a freshman in college. I can't quite put my finger on that, but the two songs they had me sing were "Fortunate Son" by CCR and uh, hang on, it's gonna come to me. Well, I take whatever I want, darling. What is that? Come on, come on, come on,
I know it. I can't think of
uh,
the name of it though.
I can't get enough of your love.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's what it was. Yeah. So I did that. I don't think they hired me. I don't remember joining that band, but I think it was actually might have been a little bit of both. I wasn't really comfortable with some of the guys in the band. Maybe this is years ago in Alabama. I'm probably at this point. I don't know if I was in the closet when I auditioned for them or not, but I certainly wasn't very out and open. I came out in high school, so but not like the way it is now. So it was a very different time. So I would say those are some of my main influences growing up. I would think for me as a soul singer and what I evolved into, especially by the time that I got to Austin, was more, Elton John and George Michael, who were influenced by other people that influenced me, like James Brown and Otis Redding. And Howling Wolf. But all of the greats, man. Sam Cooke, Patti LaBelle, Anita Baker. I love singing. Like I'll go to karaoke and sing Anita Baker songs. She's got that raspy kind of lower register voice, and there's just so many great tunes and so many great singers. So that's kind of some of my influences, I guess.
Very cool. So I know you have, as they say in the business, kind of a hard out, and you gave us such a good recap of the music and your history and your resume. I do want to get into all the stuff that you're really in the middle of
Yeah.
as we speak, and not to. I'd love to talk about this stuff in expanse, but because you have, we have to wrap this up in about 15, 20 minutes. I'd love it if we could. You just try to keep the answers a little on the concise. I want you to flesh them out, but a little on the concise side, just so we can get through as many of them as we can, because you have such a unique perspective on all of it, and you're on the front lines of everything. So let's start with, what are your biggest frustrations with? Everyone's frustrated with coronavirus. It sucks in so many different ways. But what are your biggest frustrations with the way the community and the people in the bureaucracy or the government or the city of Austin? And obviously Austin is a huge, we can almost make it a microcosm of what the industry is in a lot of ways, especially in the live performance sector. But what's been your biggest frustration so far with dealing with trying to get help and all the work you've done? And thank you, by the way. I'll probably say thank you again, but thank you for all the work you are doing. It's greatly appreciated. But what are some of your biggest frustrations that you've had?
Well, I think we live in this age that is riddled with misinformation and secondhand information, and for lack of a better word, we're so as a human race, we're so used to being able to get what we want immediately, we don't have a lot of patience. And so it's been really frustrating for me to see people, make assumptions, posting things online that aren't true, that sort of thing, but also not taking the time to just read what it is that we're sharing. There's no telling how many times that something that myself or Pat has posted to the Facebook group and trying to get, people the right information, and they'll ask questions that are easily answered had they actually clicked the article. So that's pretty frustrating. But I've come to expect that part, that I'm always going to have to kind of hand feed a handful of folks, I guess.
Yeah.
The other frustrating part, I think, is the idea that that music venues and music venue owners are somehow, the rich people in this, or that they don't deserve help. I've been seeing that a lot lately. A lot of the sentiment that, well, venues have never taken care of artists, etc. And I agree. There are definitely venues that I've played in my career where the folks involved in the booking or the talent buying, etc., or maybe even some of the staff of the actual venue were not very artist friendly. But I think that is the minority in those situations, and I think that most of Austin's music venue owners are not only probably failed musicians, but they at least love music, but they really care about musicians, and they do what they do not because they're making a buttload of money. They're doing it because it's what they love, and they're trying to help other people. And so that's been frustrating lately to see that. And of course, the bureaucracy of all of the, this resolution is this, and this became an ordinance, and well, it didn't say this exactly explicitly, so this is where we're at now. Learning how to, as I like to say, you have to learn how to speak City Hall. And so much of that is, it's almost like you have to learn how to talk in a circle, because they have people who are bringing them these ideas and writing these resolutions for them. I've helped write resolutions for city council members, and then they take it and put all of their stuff in it. They're like, the stakeholders say, this is what we need. And then they go, no, but we'll add this. Well, we got to take away that, and then it goes to staff. If it does get, passed by the council, it goes to staff, and then staff has their own interpretations if it's not explicitly laid out in the resolution. And so we found, especially working in this pandemic, that while the music, department of the city is working overtime and trying to make sure everything is great, and they were able to get out things in a record time for city work, that, in the process, some of the corners they cut, and because of their existing processes that are there, excluded stakeholders and caused some hiccups. But we're working through it. So
yeah, I can only imagine the whole bureaucracy and dealing with all that. Its reputation precedes it, and I can't imagine what it's like to be in the muck with you. So I've never done this before. I've done about a dozen of these now, and I've never done this, but I want to try it just because there, like I said, there's a lot I want to quick fire at you, and I do want to get you out for your.
Oh, don't worry about it. It's fine.
So let's try, just because I got a bunch of questions. Let's try like a 1 minute response to these following questions. Okay.
All right.
So you told us some of the frustrations. I'm sure you could go on about that, but in a minute or so, what's been some of the positives you've seen in this very unusual, unprecedented kind of dark period?
Seeing musicians come together to work on the musicians advisory panel that we put together to tackle big projects, like trying to reach out into the communities of color and really making sure that Austin's musicians, that's a very diverse group of folks, are all represented in the work that we do. Seeing music venues and advocates for venues and other things come together and really working together, and nonprofits, music nonprofits working together to solve solutions has really, really been a bright spot in that process for sure. And also the occasional note that we might get either personally or sent to Austin, Texas musicians where, it's somebody, they just got their grant money, or they got a job through a job fair that we hosted or something, and letting us know that the work that we're doing is actually having a positive impact on people's lives.
Beautiful. It's funny you mentioned the hand feeding thing, because about 5 minutes before I got on with you, I saw just a post about, it was something to, and I'm probably going to read it as soon as I get off with you, but I'm wondering if you've heard anything about it, or maybe even read the same article. But it had something to do with the way Austin is handling its venue situation versus the way Nashville is handling it. Is there anything you can tell us about that? Obviously, I'm
Sure.
you're hand feeding us, but if you can touch on what's going on, the difference between, say, a Nashville and the way Austin things are going, that would be very beneficial.
Well, Nashville, although they technically have fewer music venues than we do, and actually smaller sizes even, I think, when faced with this, and they don't have what we have here, like the Music Venue Alliance and all these other things working overtime behind the scenes for these things. But when they finally addressed it the first time, they immediately dedicated $2 million to just music venues, just to carve out for music venues. And that's the exact opposite of what has happened in the city of Austin, despite people like Jimmy Flanagan calling for a dedicated music venue preservation fund from the get-go. It's still not happened. And every time we went to the city, and by we, I mean the Music Makes Austin, which is ATXM, Music Venue Alliance, Red River Cultural District, EQ Austin, and C3 South by Southwest, and a handful of others. Every time we went to the city and said, this is what we need, here are the numbers. Even with the hobby school came out with a study that said 90% of music venues were under basically the death watch between now and Halloween. Then the money that they dispersed in the last grant that they just have been doing was like, you could buy a condo in Austin downtown for the money that's it, and it's they try to say that it's because they don't have the money or whatever, but we know that there are ways for them to get creative about this. And now what we're seeing with the new ordinance, or resolution 62 that will be taken up on the 17th, they are trying to get creative, but again, it's with mostly federal money, so we'll see what happens. But
I think I just saw something about, is YouTube trying to get some major thing going?
So the National Independent Venue Alliance, or NEVA, has which is co-led by Steven Sternshine from Herd Entertainment, who co-owns the Empire and Parish, have partnered with YouTube to create it was kind of vague programming to help with this. And I read that and I thought that sounded great, but I'll be honest with you, YouTube / Google is easily one of the biggest pirates that we allow to do what they do, because it's convenient for us. They're notorious for not paying artists fairly. And my first questions about that were, again, where are the artists in all of this? And number two, they have all these millions and millions and millions of dollars. Why can't they just cut a check? So start cutting checks. We don't need more programming. We need money.
Well, so much I want to get into that, but I'm going to kind of.
You still got time.
The situation with the venues is very difficult, because I agree with you. It's disheartening to hear that Nashville was able to whip that up and make things swift and impactful, at least on a temporary basis, because the truth is we don't know how long this is going to last. And part of my just playing devil's advocate on the venues, and I don't want to see any of the venues close, and I don't want to see people lose jobs, obviously. But part of my devil's advocate in me saw the venue situation as well. Without any idea how long this is going to last, it struck me as you've mentioned, the federal thing is not ideal. Whether it's federal or state, you're just taking a lot of allocated taxpayer money, putting it into the landowners' pockets with an indefinite, because we don't know, if it's going to be 2, 6, 12 months before people start coming back. And so it could just, in the end, like 18 months from now, just be a bunch of taxpayers putting that money in the landowner's thing. However, there should be some effort. There's got to be some effort made at the outset. You know, you got to at least give it a fighting chance, I think. And as somebody else pointed out, I believe it was Taylor. No. It was Corey from the Harvest Thieves. He pointed out how, you know, I think I was just presenting a situation where, you know, we kind of just let things settle for a while and live to fight another day. But he really pointed out, and I think I had thought of this before, and it really crystallized it, is it really in Austin, ground given up is a ground given up for good for a music venue. You know, it really is, because
it's highly unlikely that a music venue will go in the space.
No, exactly, because the prices keep going up. It's just going to be the power money coming in and taking the land.
Shady Grove, Threadgills, those will be condos.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah.
Period. We will be lucky if they have the willingness, and the city does their part to encourage them to put music venues somewhere inside of these condos or these hotels.
Yeah.
But that's what's going to go there.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah, that's right. And just to wrap up, NAKIA, and I really appreciate you being here, and I appreciate everything you're doing for the community. Absolutely. And you can kind of extend this as long as you want, and then when you're done, I'm done with you, and you can go on to your next thing. But where are you personally, right today, as we sit today, 6 months into it, looking ahead with all the different perspective you had, where are you personally as an artist looking to spend your time and energy moving forward for the next 6 to 12 months? And where do you see the community? Let's just talk about Austin for now, but if you want to bring in the music industry in general, that's cool too. Where do you see, as we stand today, where do you see that trajectory headed in the next 6 to 12 months? So you personally, and also the community at large.
I think for me personally, what I'm working toward is kind of archiving, going through all of the things that I have from my, 20 plus years as a performer, an artist, and figuring out ways to archive that, whether that's, scanning in old negatives or transferring old VHS and high 8 tapes of old performances, and getting all of those things into a central place that I can begin to focus on as much one-on-one connection with the group of people that I feel like are truly supportive of me. I don't need, I've played in front of thousands of people. I've been fortunate enough to be on television in front of 14 million people a week. I don't really need to check any more of those boxes. What's more important to me is really beginning to, as my career arc is right now, just kind of in this stable space, to look back and get those things together and give them to the fans that do support me and do love me and care about me, and hopefully encourage other people who weren't a part of that journey to begin with. They'll be able to relive it with me as we kind of go back through the history of my, how I got here, right? And so that'll be what I'm doing with my music primarily. And then I'm really going to continue to focus on doing more acting, maybe even kind of trying my hand at writing some TV at some point. And I think I'll continue to do some of the advocacy work, but, Pat Bukta, who's the executive director at Austin, Texas Musicians, is doing a great job. Our musicians at Vosbury panelists are doing a great job. That has always been the plan, would be for that to start, and for generations of musicians to come, to be able to come into that organization and run it, because it should be the musicians helping musicians. That's, as a person in recovery, I'm a big fan of one addict helping another, and I think that's very true with our community. Nobody can advocate better for musicians than musicians can. Nobody can say the things that we need to say better than we can because we're the ones who are out here doing it. I think for the community, for Austin, the cynical part of me, thinks that we've been pretty far gone from what Austin, the Austin that most folks know and love for a while. There's still pieces of it, but I think this pandemic really exposed the fact that our entire music ecosystem, the entire whole thing, the live music capital of the world, it's really built on a bunch of fucking matchsticks. I mean, it only takes one for it to go up, and then everything burns to the ground under it. And it's if Austin is to come out of this, anything we do from this point forward can't be the way we did it before. The way that artists work with venues can't be the same. The way that venues work with touring artists won't be the same. They shouldn't be the same. And I really believe in the power of the artist. There's many times that I've said this throughout the course of this and even before, which is there's very few things in the world that are more powerful than the word no. And sometimes the way to get what we need and what we desire is by just saying, you know what, I'm not going to do that. And I tell people all the time, don't play free shows, don't play unsafe shows. I get it. There should be a space for young bands to go and test out things. There still are or was lots of great spaces to do open mics for solo artists and things like that. But if you're playing a club, yes, the booze is what's making them their money, but you are the product, and you should be, being paid for that and being paid fairly. And so part of what Austin, Texas musicians advisory panelists are working on now is fair pay and really making sure that the venues and the artists are getting along in a new way that's more equitable. I don't know what, South by's not made any moves about 2021. And that's a huge indicator to me that it's going to be an even rougher 2021. And so to me, when I hear people say, oh, well, live music really won't be back until the fall of 2021, that may be true for the rest of the world. But, so much of Austin's music ecosystem depends on those 3 weeks of South by Southwest to keep venues afloat, to keep music businesses and production businesses afloat. And so something big is going to have to change. And I think you're going to see way more outdoor venues and that can be socially distanced. And a lot of these smaller clubs are going to go away because people just won't feel comfortable until there's a vaccine being in closed spaces like that. So I don't think it's going to get better before it gets worse. I think we're gonna see even more venues close. I think we're going to see even more musicians leave Austin, and it's going to be really, really hard to be a part of that and see it happen. But I do think we can weather the storm. I know that we're resourceful enough and that we have it in us to do this. But man, it's going to be work. It's going to be a lot of hard work, and it's going to take as many of us that can join the fight as possible. So if you're watching this and you're a professional musician and you are not a part of ATXN Pro, which is our professional musicians organization, head over to atxmusicians.org and fill out the application and join us. We'd love to have you. And it's going to take all of us.
Very cool, man. Well said, well spoken. I'm sure I could ask you a dozen more questions, but I know you got to go, and maybe we can get this going another time. But
yeah, man, I'm always happy to talk to you, Sam.
I really appreciate your time, NAKIA, excuse me. And I wish you the best, and I hope we can see it through. I think it is going to be a long haul for sure. There's no doubt about it. But at least we can pick up our instruments and get a little of that bad juju out. So
I hope so.
All right. Good luck to you, and I'll talk to you again soon. Thank you again.
so much.
Okay.